And I wanted to give you a little background on our project. The goal of our project was to evaluate how transport impacts ozone violations in Imperial County. And just to set the stage, what transport is, it's basically the movement of pollutants or emissions from one area, such as Mexico or the South Coast, into another area, such as Imperial County, that impacts the measured ozone concentration. So that was one of the primary drivers of this. And the second was to use the results to select high ozone periods, which we call ozone episodes, for the attainment demonstration, which is, under EPA regulations, has to include a very sophisticated modeling demonstration of attainment. And finally, to make sure that the attainment demonstration captures all different types of transport conditions. And we do see a variety of transport conditions. And just to let you know that this is kind of a two-part project. The first part, we use a variety of analysis techniques from readily available data to come to our preliminary conclusions. And the second part is that we'll be modeling a subset of these days to get more of a quantitative, more in-depth assessment. So what I'll be sharing with you today is what we've learned from our data analysis method. And this may be a little hard to see for people in the room, but it's just a study area, just to let you know, that includes south of the border, as well as Imperial County, and the South Coast Air Basin, basically. So it includes a wide area. And can you hear me okay on the phone? Yep. Okay, great. I want to just let you know the complexity of transport, especially for ozone. It can occur both at the surface and in the upper atmosphere. And we definitely understand what goes on at the surface much better than the upper atmosphere, which we have very limited data to really assess that. And of course, political boundaries don't prevent the movement of pollutants, which always kind of complicates the analysis. And one of the key things in an evaluation of transport is the weather conditions and the distribution of emissions. Were the weather conditions and were emissions sufficient to move the pollutants from one area to another and impact ozone? And another thing that complicates this is you can have what we call carryover, where remaining emissions in ozone from the previous day can just kind of remain around on really stagnant days, and that can contribute to ozone violations on the following day. And feel free to interrupt me if you have any questions or I'm going too fast. Transport, the goal of our analysis was basically to characterize days. Which days is there basically an overwhelming contribution from another area where the evidence points that Imperial County emissions or activities did not contribute to that violation. And the other is a shared. In which violation does it look like there could be a shared responsibility, or we're not able to ascertain whether it was an overwhelming. I will let you know that transport is very day specific. As weather conditions change, so can transport impact or transport direction. So that's why we...
So that includes also weekends would have an effect?
Yes. And what we did is, because we know transport has a very potential impact in Imperial County, we looked at all the ozone violation days that occurred in the last 6 years, between 2002 to 2007. But what I'm going to share with you today is the results for the last 3 years, 2005 through 2007. And we'll probably look at 2008 as the ozone season progressed. What we do is what we call data analysis. We use available air quality data, weather data, whatever emissions data we have to evaluate transport potential. The distribution of ozone violations is very important in the study area. We look at to see how widespread those high ozone concentrations are, or are they limited to an area. And then we look at, key is evaluating weather data. We've got hourly and instantaneous wind speed and direction data, which we thoroughly evaluate. And then we look at the time of day that ozone violations occur to see if that will give us some insight into transport. And then we use a fairly sophisticated program called the trajectory model that estimates the path that an air parcel likely took before and during the ozone violation. So those are kind of our 4 basic methods. And I'd like to just give you a flavor for how we put those together. The first thing we do is we want to get a visual look at the spatial extent of the high ozone concentrations. So we actually put them on a map so we can see, are the concentrations limited to the border area? Were they high in the South Coast and high in Westmoreland? You know, were they high in Mexicali? What was the kind of, how widespread were they? And I'll give you an example of a map in a minute. And then next we graph hourly ozone concentrations from basically 24 hours of the day. And we're looking to see, you know, what time do the highest hourly concentrations occur, and what time, and do these, what we call profiles, do they look similar to each other? Like they may give us a key to the similarity of emission sources. And I'll show you an example of one of those in a minute. And then we take the hourly weather data and evaluate prevailing wind speed and direction. And we also look at upper air data when it's available. And then we use our trajectory program to estimate the path an air parcel took, approximately 36 hours, between 36 to 42 hours prior to the violation. This is a very generalized ozone map that may be a little hard to see in this room, probably easier to see on your computer screens. But the whole green area there is basically areas without ozone violations. And I don't know if you can see the area down kind of by the border area in Mexicali and Calexico. There's actually the only area on that day that had ozone violations. So these kind of maps kind of help us set the stage when we first approach looking at a specific day. This is kind of a stylized, the hourly ozone concentration. Now the concentrations are going up the vertical axis, and the hour of the day is going across the horizontal axis. And as you see, ozone kind of starts building up by midday and then kind of decreasing as we come to the evening hours. There's 2 things we look for. One is the timing of the peaks. On this you may be able to see that there's 2 sites in Mexicali that have peaks earlier in the day than a Calexico site, which is in red. When we see a progression of ozone peaks along what we would call a transport path, where one's earlier in the day in a source area and one's later in the day in what we would call the receptor area, this can be a very good indicator of the likelihood that transport was impacting the receptor area. Another thing that we also look for is, which is not illustrated on this slide, is the similarity of the profiles. Do sites have similar profiles? Then that kind of indicates similar emission sources.